The title's motivated by the directionality. The idea that by going into otherwise inaccessible regions of a country, you can capture revenues from abroad. That's the unusual idea. For companies, the paper poses both opportunities and challenges. The opportunity in China is this: you too can rent the higher channel. And it might be a very efficient thing to do rather than to try to establish independent distribution networks. There are costs and there are risks, but it's an option. For those seeking to emulate higher in China, it's a real challenge because first mover advantages are dramatic. And higher's market share in the countryside is very high. For companies seeking to emulate higher outside of China, that's where the ballgame becomes very interesting. Who will be the first, for example, to do the same? Let's go back to India. Who will be the first to do the same in other regions? Will this also be a Chinese export? Or will domestic companies, given the home team advantage, figure out the path to the countryside and rent it out to others, as Haier has done in China? Only time will tell. The idea came from meeting the team that designed the rural distribution system for the Haier Group. I think I met them in Qingdao in July 2010. Had I known this question were coming, I might have brought a picture of the team. But for their leader, they're all youngsters in their 20s. And they described to me how very powerful team incentives, part of the higher management system, motivated them to rethink entirely rural distribution in China. And they asked what, in retrospect, are the obvious questions. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? Which almost no one had asked because the traditional 5,000-year-old system had hardly changed. What are the alternatives to it? And what they discovered through very careful analysis was that at a certain scale, it became much more efficient to substitute a circular for a radial distribution system. And once they had that idea, the rest was easy. Implementation, of course, was not easy, but conceptually the redesign was easy. So I was totally taken with this, and I put it in my back pocket then. The idea came to fruition, however, when I went back, reread, and rethought the 2008 paper with Max Boiseau that's mentioned here. And I did so, sadly, in the context of writing a chapter for a book in memory of Max. Max passed away a few years ago, and his friends, colleagues, decided to put together a volume to honor his enormous contribution in many fields. And that forced me to rethink the earlier paper. And the rethink is there out loud in the manuscript you've got in front of you. So it's a combination of two things. One is meeting the team, very, very important, understanding their process. And then second, being asked to rethink a paper published in 2008, really written in 2006. And that rethinking then brought the conclusions you see. Well, there are kind of two methods. Method number one is boots on the ground. Quite apart from interviewing the team, I went out into the countryside of China and watched the distribution system, watched these teams at work. And I've done so as recently as March. Whenever I get to China, whenever there's the opportunity, I don't have to go very far inland, but I'll go out into the rural counties of Qingdao, into the rural counties in southern Jiangsu province, even the rural counties around Beijing, which can be very, very poor, by the way, and observe how the goods are distributed, how they're sold. It's the combination of these direct observations and repeated observations. I typically go back to the same sites to judge change over time. The combination of repeated field observation with meeting the teams, then with introspection, with thinking about it, that produces this result. Now, I'm going to use your question as a lever for telling you some of the developments that have happened. And I want to tell you about one merchant in rural Qingdao, about an hour away from the metropolitan area, whom I visited now 3 or 4 times because it's convenient. His name is Huang. There are lots of people named Huang in China. He's from the villages of China, a village near Qingdao, and he's a very plain man. Even today, in the summertime at least, he still wears sandals, not shoes. He started a small business with an investment, maybe 60,000 RMB, less than $10,000 at the time. It was a town-level store where he made large appliances, even small electronics, available to local residents. And he's gained enormously from this distribution system because he doesn't have to keep much inventory, doesn't have to tie up money in inventory, and doesn't have to tie up time, as mentioned in the paper, in going to the county-level city to make the purchases. But here's the part that I found so interesting. First of all, doesn't compete on price. I've watched customers come and go, and I've watched him refuse to drop prices. Oh, maybe some small, gift he would add in, but no major drop in prices. He does compete on service. Usually the deal is, tell you what, if you're able to make this purchase today, it's a refrigerator. Sometimes it could be 2, one for mother-in-law. I'll put them on the back of my truck right now. We'll take them to your house, and you'll get a free ride home. And that often clinches the deal. But beyond this, he's developed a network of representatives, of coordinators in the small villages. And so the villagers, only 10 minutes away or so, but they'll collectively make a trip to town to visit his store. And that business has grown to the point where now he has opened outlets in the villages. And last time I got to see the first of them. About the size of this room, not much larger. Oh, maybe twice the size of this room. Not huge, very plain merchandise. But there you have it. He's created a second business, will create a third business. And his business has grown dramatically as the result of the distribution information systems described in the paper. A complicated question. There are a couple of answers. One is just arithmetic. If you have a first mover advantage as Haier has in China's rural markets, then you can rent the Haier highway, out to other firms, including your direct competitors. And you can extract not only highway tolls, but you can gain further revenues through providing service that, again, the foreign competitors aren't able to provide. So what you're doing is you're capturing at least one end of, what is it called, the smile curve from Stan Xie. You're capturing distribution and service revenues and profits, which can actually be much greater than manufacturing profits. And in this sense, you're taking money away from your foreign competitors. It's not acquiring revenue abroad, but it's acquiring revenue domestically that might otherwise go to foreign competitors. Now, the larger question, and it's a trickier question, is whether the capability, the rural distribution capability at home is transferable abroad. And quite frankly, I don't yet know the answer to that question. And why is that? It's because China's unusual. Any country that size, China, India, going to be unusual, have unique characteristics. But in China's case, and I think a little bit in contrast to India, the physical infrastructure is fairly well developed. And so it's easy to roll the trucks in a way that is, or it seems easy, I should say, to roll the trucks in a way that is efficient. In fact, in China, as it noted in the paper, very few Chinese firms have taken advantage of these potential efficiencies. It's simply the result of tradition. It's the result of having small and fragmented markets. And it's, it just takes a while before there's breakthrough thinking about distribution in China. But once the breakthrough thinking occurs, then it's possible to actually implement this thinking, given that the asphalt's all in place and large, efficient trucks can be moved around with a day's worth of distribution for many, many outlets. China could be different. India, could be different. And that's because it's my sense that the highway system's not as well developed. And so implementation of a similar platform in India may prove difficult. That said, the success in China, I think, might motivate Haier or Haier's competitors in India to try to do the same somehow. It's incredibly relevant for Alibaba. You've probably read that Alibaba, new technology, has just made a $360 million investment in a joint venture with Haier, old technology. Right? The new requires the old to move the goods. And so the intent of the joint venture is to open distribution for all large goods, including furniture, sold over Taobao, Tmall, by Alibaba into the countryside of China. The joint venture's in its early stages. Who can guess what the success will be? But it's very, very relevant. It will be really interesting to see. I'm not expert really on other countries, so it's hard for me to sit here and say what the rural distribution issues in India, in Latin America, in sub-Saharan Africa are like. My guess is that the economies, especially sub-Saharan Africa, look not only a lot like China, but maybe an exaggerated version of China, where you have prosperity in the port cities and much less development in the hinterlands. And the question is the role of physical infrastructure in opening distribution there. Circumvent the problems of physical infrastructure or correct those problems, and then, yes, the higher model has enormous applicability outside of the Chinese context. And so that turns then to the question of Haier's strategy. Is there strategy to make more refrigerators at a time when manufacturing is becoming something of a commodity and becomes very portable? Or is the strategy, again, to hit the two ends of the smile curve? One side, design, the other side, distribution and service, where the money is. And if so, will they decide to roll up their sleeves and try to do in other countries what they've done in China? I don't know the answer to that. I've raised the question with them. And quite frankly, the senior managers, when they hear the question, at first almost don't grasp it. And because they have so focused, of course, on China as the base of their operations. My bet, however, is that they'll try. My bet is that they'll do so in a small country. I can't name a country. And they'll do so following their general model of internationalization. Remember the history. They were offered, they almost had the right of first refusal on Maytag in the United States. They wouldn't do it for many reasons. In part, it was at the time in the history when they were less confident than they are now. They were smaller, they were less confident, but there were other reasons as well. One of their key Western acquisitions has been Fisher & Paykel, New Zealand-based high-end appliance company, great brand, okay? But they're acquiring it in part for the technology. They have advanced technology. They're acquiring it in part because New Zealand's a small country. It's a great country, but it's a small country. And it may be a very good place for Haier to learn a lot more about Western markets at lower cost than a larger country like the U.S. So my guess would be if they try to port their system, their distribution system outside of China, likely sub-Saharan Africa, likely a smaller country, and likely a learning experience for them. How it will come out, who can guess at this time? The most surprising piece here for a person brought up in this culture is the speed with which organizational innovation takes place. It's almost as if the org chart changes every Saturday morning when the senior management meets. I attempt to learn something, I try to grasp it, I try to get the details. The ink is dry on paper almost, and there's version 2, version 3, version 4. That's the nature of the management process in China. And it makes research as we know it, as Western scholars know it, a little bit challenging because we want to get data. We want to get, quote, hard data, nail down the facts. In China, those facts are always shifting on you because everything's experimental. It's a highly decentralized system. And if you're lucky, you'll get a first approximation. So this paper, for example, I can't guarantee its accuracy at the time it's printed. It may have all changed by then. Maybe that should be an asterisk at the very beginning. I don't know. But that's the biggest surprise over the last 5 or 6 years. There are a couple things possible. I think the immediate piece of research will be more microscopic, to go into the teams, to observe the teams even more closely, and to ask a question that's a little different than the question posed in this paper. In the paper you got, Mukul, the proposition is that a firm may effectively internationalize by developing otherwise impenetrable domestic markets, opening access to those markets to foreign companies. We can certainly observe the progress of the system, the sustainability of this system. And based on the analyst reports, it looks like it's doing pretty well. Certainly, Hire's performance has jumped dramatically from 2012 to 2013, at a time when its main domestic competitors haven't done quite so well. But there's another issue I think needs to be explored. The paper describes briefly the team structure of Hire, the so-called ZZJYTs, that operate as if they're standalone businesses, even though they're very, very small. 12, 13 people, perhaps. The question is whether these teams become even more independent of the center of Hire. Some instances already, the teams do internal M&A. One team will literally acquire another through an internal bidding process. Sometimes they do joint ventures with their distributors, with their retailers. They have partial HR function at this point. I mentioned hiring village coordinators to you. Some have begun to spin out of Hire and become totally independent legal entities, still within the family, but legally separate. And so the big question I want to research is whether this is the future of capitalism of China. Are we going to see the devolution of the firm? Our standard theories, going back many, many years, Alfred Chandler, the historian, Oliver Williamson, the theorist of transaction cost economics, talk about the integration of the firm from market to hierarchy. But my question is whether in China they're going to ultimately solve the problem of enterprise reform, which has proved intractable, quite frankly, by reversing this process, by going from hierarchy to market, by spinning out of large organizations, whether or not state-owned. Hire is not state-owned. By spinning out of large organizations little pieces, and by having these pieces become the central economic actors in the marketplace of China. I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's a fundamental question, and it has to be pursued. Given China's highly fragmented market structure, which I don't think will change fundamentally, despite a rail system, despite a highway system, it's entirely possible that rather from market to hierarchy, you'll see China go from hierarchy to market as a solution to many, many problems.